Hello, my friend. I'm so glad you are here. Tonight, I have another wonderful, calm, and peaceful story to share with you. This time, we'll talk about a man whose name you've likely heard before, Alexander Graham Bell. The man who gave the world the telephone and whose life was filled with curiosity, creativity, and a deep love for helping others. A true genius whose work changed the way we communicate, connecting people across distances we once thought impossible. But before we begin, I ask you to do something for me. If you enjoy these stories and want to hear more, please like this video and subscribe. Your support helps me continue sharing these calming, soothing tales. Stories of amazing geniuses from the past who shaped the world. And now, let's take a moment to settle in. Close your eyes if you can and find a comfortable place. Take a deep, slow breath with me. Inhale gently. Let the air fill your lungs and feel your body begin to relax. Hold it for just a moment, and then exhale slowly, letting go of any tension you may be holding on to. Let the calmness wash over you. Let's do that again. Inhale slowly, deeply, and now let it go. Feel yourself sinking deeper into relaxation, into peace. The kind of peace that makes it easier to listen, to drift into a calm, soothing. As you breathe deeply, know that you're safe here. This time is for you to relax, to listen, and to enjoy the story of Alexander Graham Bell, who, just like us, had his own journey to find peace and purpose. As you relax deeper, let me take you back to the year 1847. It was in a small town called Edinburgh, in Scotland, where a child was born on March 3rd. His name was Alexander Graham Bell. It was a time when the air was crisp and the wind whispered through the trees. Imagine it now. The cool breeze, the sound of it rustling the leaves, the soft scent of earth and rain, a promise of growth. A small, peaceful home where Alexander was brought into this world, the son of a man named Melville Bell, a man deeply interested in speech and the science of sound. His mother, Eliza Grace Simons, was a woman of grace and quiet strength, and it was from her that young Alexander inherited a love for learning and the world around him. The family lived in a world where Alexander's father was already well known for his work with the deaf. Melville Bell had created a system of speech instruction, a new way to help those who couldn't hear find their voices. And so, it's no surprise that young Alexander, from a very early age, found himself surrounded by this world of sound, of speech, and of listening. Can you imagine the feeling of being surrounded by that kind of atmosphere? The quiet hum of conversation, the soft yet powerful words that fill the air with meaning. Alexander's childhood was full of these sounds, and they shaped him into the man he would one day become. But even as a child, Alexander was curious. He didn't just want to understand speech. He wanted to know how things worked. He would spend hours, lost in thought, observing the world around him, asking questions, wondering how sounds traveled, and how they could be shared with others. It was in these early years that he began to develop a fascination with sound and communication. Ideas that would later lead him down a path few could have imagined. This was a boy who would one day help change the world, just by asking a question and seeking the answers. Alexander had two siblings, his older brother, Melville, and his younger brother, Edward. The house was full of life, full of conversation and laughter, but also quiet moments of learning. Alexander wasn't the only curious one. His family shared a love for discovering new things, for exploring the world in all its quiet wonder. As a child, Alexander was not like most boys. While others played outside, he found joy in asking questions. He loved to watch the birds, to listen to the wind, to feel the rain on his face, and wonder about the world around him. He was especially drawn to sound, how it traveled, how it connected people, and how it could be used to help those who couldn't hear. His curiosity led him to ask his father many questions about his work, about the science of speech and sound. And his father, who had worked with the deaf for many years, was patient. He taught Alexander everything he knew, and it wasn't just about words. It was about how sound could shape the world. Alexander's school days were quiet, peaceful. He wasn't a boy who cared for much noise. Instead, he focused on his studies with a quiet determination. He went to a local school, where he quickly became known for his sharp mind, his ability to think deeply. He had a few close friends, but he wasn't one to seek attention. His thoughts were often far beyond the classroom, lost in the mysteries of sound and how it could be understood. The smell of old books in the classroom, the soft rustling of pages turning. His thoughts, like the whispers in the air, always seeking to understand more. And it wasn't just his studies that shaped him. His family life was filled with the love of learning, of exploring new ideas. His father, a man so dedicated to helping others, and his mother, a woman of grace, always encouraged him to follow his passions, to ask questions, and seek answers. The warmth of their home was filled with love, and their world was one of deep conversation and even deeper listening. And as he grew older, Alexander's curiosity only deepened. He began experimenting with his own inventions, playing with ways to amplify sound. Even at such a young age, his mind was already working on ideas that would change the world forever. Ideas that would help those who couldn't hear to be heard. Alexander's childhood was one of quiet wonder. He was surrounded by love, by sound, by questions and answers. And as the years passed, his curiosity only grew, shaping him into the man who would one day connect the world in a way that had never been imagined before. As Alexander grew older, his curiosity only deepened. His teenage years were filled with a growing sense of wonder about the world around him, the way sound traveled through the air, the way speech could be understood by those who could not hear. His interest in the world of sound became more focused, and at the same time, his life was filled with the usual experiences of a young man coming into his own. Alexander was a thoughtful teenager, often lost in his thoughts, his mind constantly searching for answers. His family, though supportive, could see how deeply his mind was occupied. It was as if he could hear the world in a way that no one else could. His schooling became more intense, and it wasn't always easy. Like many young men, Alexander struggled with the rigid structure of school. He often found himself frustrated with the traditional ways of learning, the way teachers dictated what should be learned, without allowing for the freedom to explore ideas. He longed for more freedom to think, to experiment, to discover. It was during these years that Alexander began to explore ideas on his own. At the age of 16, he began experimenting with sound in his spare time. He built his first rudimentary hearing device, a sort of sound amplifier, out of scrap materials, testing the limits of what was possible. The young man's determination was clear. Even then, he knew that sound had the power to change lives, to connect people in ways no one had ever imagined. A young man working late into the night in his small workshop, surrounded by tools and bits of wood, glass, and metal. His mind was alive with possibilities. The soft click of the tools, the quiet hum of his thoughts, the smell of wood shavings, and the faint scent of oil in the air. The room was quiet, save for the occasional sound of a tool hitting metal or the soft hum of a machine coming to life. He continued his studies, but the world of books and classrooms wasn't enough. His curiosity demanded action, and so Alexander sought out opportunities to apply his ideas. It was during these years that he became involved in teaching the deaf, following in his father's footsteps. It was here, in the work of teaching the deaf to speak, that he began to understand just how deeply his passions could be connected to his own purpose in life. He traveled to different parts of Scotland, working with individuals who had lost their ability to hear. He spent countless hours helping them find their voices again, teaching them to communicate in ways they never thought possible. In doing so, Alexander grew even more determined to find ways to amplify sound and improve communication. The challenges he faced were great. The technology of the time was limited, and many of his ideas were met with skepticism. But Alexander never wavered. His heart and mind were committed to his mission, and he knew that one day his work would change the world. And as he continued to work with the deaf, Alexander's passion for invention grew stronger. He began to experiment with new devices, working tirelessly to create a way for the deaf to hear. And it was this drive that would eventually lead him to the world-changing invention we now know as the telephone. As the years passed, Alexander's determination to improve communication grew stronger. His mind was constantly at work, seeking ways to amplify sound, to help people hear what they could not. His teenage years had prepared him, shaping his thoughts, his ideas, and his need to solve the mysteries of the world around him. But the road to discovery is never easy. There were obstacles, moments of doubt. Alexander faced many challenges, both personal and professional. He continued his studies, though he often found himself frustrated by the limitations of the time. The technology was primitive, and the ideas of those around him often did not align with his own. His family supported him, but they also worried. Alexander was determined, yes, but the constant experiments, the hours of work alone, took their toll. There were moments when it seemed as if his dreams might never come to fruition. But in those quiet moments, when the world outside fell silent, Alexander would reflect on the future. He knew that great things were waiting for him, just beyond the horizon. He continued his work with the deaf, helping them to speak, to communicate. It was through this work that he began to understand the true power of sound, the potential it held. He didn't stop there. He worked tirelessly, creating new devices, always testing and refining his idea. One day, while experimenting with a new method of transmitting sound, Alexander realized something extraordinary. He was able to transmit sound over a wire, a moment that would change the course of history. He had found a way to send a voice across distances, to bridge the gap between silence and speech. The day he made this discovery, he could feel something shift inside of him. It was a quiet triumph, one that would forever change the way the world communicates. The stillness of that moment, the soft hum of his thoughts as the wires carried the sound of his voice for the first time, he knew that he had made a breakthrough. And so Alexander's journey continued. He faced more struggles, more doubts, but each step brought him closer to his dream. He worked day and night, determined to perfect his invention. His family, though they worried, stood by him. His mind was sharp, his heart filled with purpose. He knew that his work would one day help people to hear, to connect, to be understood. As the years passed, Alexander's determination to improve communication grew stronger. His mind was constantly at work, seeking ways to amplify sound, to help people hear what they could not. His teenage years had prepared him, shaping his thoughts, his ideas, and his need to solve the mysteries of the world around him. But the road to discovery is never easy. There were obstacles, moments of doubt. Alexander faced many challenges, both personal and professional. He continued his studies, though he often found himself frustrated by the limitations of the time. The technology was primitive, and the ideas of those around him often did not align with his own. His family supported him, but they also worried. Alexander was determined, yes, but the constant experiments, the hours of work alone, took their toll. There were moments when it seemed as if his dreams might never come to fruition. But in those quiet moments, when the world outside fell silent, Alexander would reflect on the future. He knew that great things were waiting for him just beyond the horizon. He continued his work with the deaf, helping them to speak, to communicate. It was through this work that he began to understand the true power of sound, the potential it held. He didn't stop there. He worked tirelessly, creating new devices, always testing and refining his idea. One day, while experimenting with a new method of transmitting sound, Alexander realized something extraordinary. He was able to transmit sound over a wire, a moment that would change the course of history. He had found a way to send a voice across distances, to bridge the gap between silence and speech. The day he made this discovery, he could feel something shift inside of him. It was a quiet triumph, one that would forever change the way the world communicates. Can you imagine, my friend, the stillness of that moment, the soft hum of his thoughts, as the wires carried the sound of his voice for the first time? He knew that he had made a breakthrough, and so Alexander's journey continued. He faced more struggles, more doubts, but each step brought him closer to his dream. He worked day and night, determined to perfect his invention. His family, though they worried, stood by him. His mind was sharp, his heart filled with purpose. He knew that his work would one day help people to hear, to connect, to be understood. The room was quiet, only the soft crackling of a lamp in the corner, the faint scratching of pencil on paper as Alexander scribbled down his latest thought. His mind was restless, searching for answers, testing ideas. Wires stretched across the table, tiny pieces of metal carefully placed, tools scattered around him. He had been working for hours, days, maybe longer. His hands moved instinctively, adjusting a wire here, tightening a screw there. His breath slow and steady as he worked. Then, a sound, faint, almost imperceptible. His heart skipped a beat. He leaned closer, listening. Could it be? Had he finally done it? He spoke into the device, his voice low but firm. The sound was heard. His assistant, startled, turned to him with wide eyes. It had worked. It had truly worked. For a moment, there was only silence, then a deep breath. The weight of years of work pressing into this one miraculous instant. Alexander's fingers trembled as he adjusted the wires again, speaking once more, testing, listening. Each sound, each vibration, proof that the impossible had become reality. That night, as he sat back in his chair, exhaustion creeping into his bones, he closed his eyes and let out a long, slow sigh. He had done something that would change the world. And yet, It was only the beginning. The world did not yet know what had happened in that quiet room. The whispers of sound carried through the wires. The birth of a new era in communication. But soon, very soon, they would. The morning air was crisp. The soft golden light of the sun spilling through the windows as Alexander prepared for the moment that would change everything. His hands moved carefully, adjusting wires, checking connections, his heart steady, yet his mind racing. Today he would prove to the world what he had discovered. In the small, crowded room, murmurs filled the air. Scientists, scholars, men of influence, all gathered, waiting, watching. They had heard the whispers about a device, a machine that could carry a voice through wires. But could it really be true? Could sound travel through nothing but an invisible current? Alexander took a deep breath. Steadying himself, he lifted the device to his lips and spoke. "Mr. Watson, come here. I want to see you." A hush fell over the room. Eyes widened, breaths held, and then footsteps. Hurried, uncertain. On the other end of the wire, Thomas Watson, Alexander's loyal assistant, appeared through the door, his face alight with astonishment. It had worked. The words had traveled, not by messenger, not by letter, but by an invisible force, carried through wires, across space, arriving as clear as if spoken in the same room. The room erupted, gasps of disbelief, whispers of wonder. Some leaned closer, inspecting the wires, the device, trying to understand what they had just witnessed. Others shook their heads, unable to grasp the magnitude of the moment. Alexander stood silently, watching, listening, feeling the weight of what he had just done. This was no longer a mere experiment, no longer an idea trapped within the confines of his mind. This was real, and the world would never be the same. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, and the last of the visitors left, Alexander remained, staring at his invention, the small device that had bridged the gap between silence and speech. He exhaled slowly, the realization settling deep within him. The telephone had been born. News of Alexander's invention spread like ripples in a still pond. Slow at first, then growing, reaching farther, faster. At first, many were skeptical. A voice traveling through wires? It sounded like something from a dream. A story told by an old man by the fire. Not something real. But then, the demonstrations continued, again and again, proving the impossible had become reality. Soon, the whispers turned into excitement, then into demand. People wanted to see it, to hear it with their own ears. Some were amazed, others suspicious, but none could ignore what was happening. Investors came, businessmen with sharp suits and even sharper minds. They saw not just an invention, but a future, a world connected in a way no one had imagined before. Telephone, a name that would soon be spoken in every corner of the world. But with success came challenges, competitors, legal battles. The world was changing, and Alexander found himself at the center of it all. He had not set out to become a businessman, but now he was forced to protect his creation. Through it all, he remained the same, a man devoted to knowledge, to progress, to helping others. His heart, after all, had always been with the deaf, those who lived in a world of silence. He never forgot them, never stopped trying to make their world brighter, clearer, more connected. And yet, amidst all the invention, the work, the endless meetings and demonstrations, there was something else waiting for him, something unexpected, something as powerful as any discovery he had ever made. Her name was Mabel. Mabel Hubbard, a young woman full of life and intelligence. She had lost her hearing to scarlet fever as a child, but that had never dimmed her spirit. She was strong, determined, with a quiet grace that captured Alexander's heart from the moment they met. At first, he was simply her teacher, guiding her, helping her navigate the world of speech. But as time passed, something deeper grew between them. She saw not just the inventor, not just the man lost in wires and idea, but the soul behind it all. And he saw in her life a reason beyond science and discovery. Their love grew in quiet moments, in stolen glances, in long conversations where words were not always neat. And then, one day, Alexander knew he could not imagine his life without her. In a small private ceremony, they became husband and wife. The man who had given voice to the world now found the greatest joy in the silent, unwavering love of the woman beside him. Their life together was filled with laughter, with adventure, with the simple joys of love and companionship. Mabel was his anchor, his greatest supporter. Through every success, every struggle, she remained by his side, her presence a quiet reminder of what truly mattered. And so, even as Alexander's name became known across the world, even as the telephone found its way into homes, into businesses, into history itself, a husband, a teacher, a dreamer, the days turned to months, the months to years, and Alexander's life continued to change. His name was now spoken in the halls of science, in business meetings, in homes where his invention brought voices to loved ones miles apart. But at home, in the quiet of the evening, he was simply a husband, and soon a father. Mabel and Alexander built a life together, one filled with love, laughter, and the curiosity that had always driven him. They had children, little footsteps echoing through their home, the sound of giggles and bedtime stories filling the air. Despite the demands of his growing legacy, Alexander made time for his family. He would sit with his children, telling them stories of discovery, of adventure, of the wonders of the world. He wanted them to know, to feel, that knowledge was not just for scholars in faraway halls. It was everywhere, in the stars above, in the whisper of the wind, in the smallest sound carried through the air. And yet, his mind never rested. The telephone had been his greatest success, but it was not his only passion. He explored new ideas, sound, flight, even ways to help the deaf communicate better. His workshop was always alive with experiments, papers scattered, wires dangling, as his hands continued to shape the future. But with great achievements came sacrifices. The world demanded more of him. And slowly, the quiet moments at home became fewer. There were meetings, speeches, honors bestowed upon him. He was admired, respected, yet he often longed for the simple days of quiet invention, of working in peace undisturbed by the weight of his fame. Still, through it all, Mabel remained his anchor. She understood his restless mind, his need to create, to build, to give the world something it had never known before. He stood by him, supporting him, reminding him that no matter how far his ideas took him, home was always waiting. As the years passed, Alexander watched the world change before his eyes. The telephone, once a strange contraption that few believed in, was now everywhere. It connected cities, countries, families divided by great distances. What had once been a whisper in his mind had become the voice of the world. He continued his work, never satisfied with standing still. He explored aerodynamics, creating new designs for flying machines. He studied sound and communication, searching for ways to help those who could not hear. He even worked on early inventions that would lead to the microphone, to recording sound itself. But time moves forward, even for the greatest minds. His hair turned white, his hands slower than before, and yet his eyes still held the same spark, the same curiosity that had been there since childhood. One evening, as he sat by the fire, Mabel at his side, he looked around their home. The photographs, the letters, the inventions that had shaped his life. He took a deep breath, letting it all settle in his heart. He had done what he had set out to do. He had given the world something that would outlive him, something that would carry voices across time itself. And so, on a quiet day in 1922, Alexander Graham Bell took his last breath. The world lost a great inventor, but his voice, his legacy, it never faded. To this day, each time a phone rings, each time a voice travels across a wire, a signal, a satellite, his dream lives on, and somewhere, in the vast expanse of time and memory, his words still echo. "Mr. Watson, come here. I want to see you." The years pass like pages turning in a book, one discovery leading to the next, one chapter of life unfolding into another. Alexander Graham Bell was no longer the young man tinkering in his workshop, chasing after sounds that no one else could hear. He was now a figure of great renown, his name spoken with admiration, his invention changing the world before his very eyes. Yet, despite his success, he remained restless. The telephone had been a great achievement, but his mind was always moving, always searching for what lay just beyond the horizon. He turned his attention to new challenges, new ideas, new ways to bring progress into the world. One of his greatest passions became helping the deaf. His beloved wife, Mabel, had lost her hearing as a child, and Alexander had always been deeply moved by the struggles of those who lived in silence. He devoted years to researching ways to improve communication for the deaf, developing techniques and devices to help them experience sound in different ways. But the sound was not his only fascination. He looked to the sky, wondering if man could truly take flight. He experimented with kites, with aerodynamics, with the very forces that birds had mastered for millions of years. He built flying machines, testing them with a childlike wonder, dreaming of a world where people soared through the air as effortlessly as once traveled across the land. His home became a place of endless experiment. Wires stretched across rooms, strange contraptions filled the hallways, stacks of notes and sketches covered every desk. His mind never stopped working, never stopped wondering, never stopped pushing the boundaries of what was possible. Fame had come, but Alexander never sought it. He had little interest in wealth, in prestige, in the titles bestowed upon him. What he loved most was discovery, the thrill of uncovering something new, the joy of creating for the sake of creation itself. Yet, with success came responsibility. He traveled often, giving speeches, attending events, meeting with world leaders who wished to shake the hand of the man who had given humanity its voice. So he was honored, celebrated, but deep down he longed for the quiet of his workshop, the simple pleasure of losing himself in invention. Even in his later years, Alexander remained as curious as ever. He explored the mysteries of the ocean, the possibilities of sound waves, even the science of genetics. He believed that knowledge had no end, that there was always something more to learn, something more to discover. His home in Nova Scotia became his sanctuary. He would walk along the shores, listening to the waves, feeling the salty breeze against his skin. He would sit by the fire in the evenings, reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. From a curious boy in Scotland to a man who had forever changed the way people connected across the world. He often spoke of the future, of things he would not live to see, but that he knew would one day come to pass. Wireless communication, television, even the idea of speaking across great distances without the need for wires at all. His mind was always years, decades, centuries ahead. Time, however, waits for no man. The hands that once built the telephone, that once shaped the future, grew slower. His hair, now white as the winter snow, framed a face lined with years of thought and discovery. But his eyes, his eyes still held that spark, that hunger for knowledge, that endless wonder. His beloved Mabel remained by his side, as she always had, through every triumph, every challenge, every late night spent lost in thought. She was there. She had been his greatest love, his strongest supporter, the reason he had first devoted himself to the study of sound and speech. One evening, as he sat with her watching the sun sink below the horizon, he took her hand and smiled. "The world is still full of wonders," he whispered, "and I wish I had another 100 years to discover them all." But time had other plans. In the summer of 1922, Alexander Graham Bell fell ill. The man who had spent his life giving voice to the world was growing quiet. His family gathered by his bedside, the sound of the waves drifting through the open windows of their home. He looked around at the faces of those he loved, at the world he had helped shape, and he knew his work was done. And then, in the silence of the night, his breath slowed, his eyes closed, and Alexander Graham Bell, the man who had given humanity its voice, fell into a sleep from which he would not awaken. As the years passed, Alexander Graham Bell grew older, his once boundless energy slowing, like the fading light of a setting sun. His hands, which had once built the telephone, now trembled slightly with age. His steps, once quick with excitement, now slower, more measured. But his mind remained as sharp as ever, filled with ideas, dreams, and the same insatiable curiosity that had guided him all his life. Yet, even the greatest minds cannot escape the passage of time. In the summer of 1922, in his beloved home in Nova Scotia, Alexander fell ill. It began as a quiet weakness, a lingering fatigue. But soon, his breath grew heavy, his body weary. His family watched over him with care, knowing that the man who had given the world his voice was growing quieter with each passing day. Mabel was always by his side, holding his hand, whispering to him, even though she could not hear his voice in return. She had been with him through it all, from the first days of discovery to the height of his success. Now, she remained, her love steadfast, her presence a comfort as the final chapter of his story neared its end. One evening, as the summer air drifted through the open windows, carrying the scent of the sea, Alexander lay still, his breathing shallow. The waves, the same waves he had listened to for years, whispered against the shore, their rhythm steady, like a lullaby from the earth itself. He opened his eyes one last time, gazing at his wife, his family, the world he had loved so deeply. And in that quiet moment, his final words drifted into the air like a fading echo. No, you cannot speak. And then, silence. A silence not of absence, but of peace, of completion, of a life fully lived. Alexander Graham Bell, the man who had given humanity the gift of voice, had spoken his last. Alexander Graham Bell had spent his life chasing discovery, exploring the endless mysteries of sound and communication. But even the brightest minds, the most brilliant inventors, cannot outrun time. And so, on August 2nd, 1922, in the peaceful hills of Nova Scotia, at the age of 75, his journey came to an end. The man who had given the world a voice slowly drifted into silence. His breath grew softer, slower, until at last it faded into the hush of the summer evening. The wind whispered through the trees, the waves kissed the shore, and Alexander Graham Bell, surrounded by love, by family, by the home he cherished, took his final rest. But what of Mabel, his beloved wife, the woman who had stood beside him through every triumph, every challenge? She had been there at the beginning of his great journey, and now she was there at the end. She held his hand, felt the warmth leave his skin, and knew that the world had lost something irreplaceable. Yet, she was not left alone, not without support. Alexander had built a legacy not just of invention, but of security. The wealth he had earned, the fortune his discoveries had brought, it ensured that Mabel would never struggle. She remained in their home, carrying on the work they had begun together. For though her husband was gone, the echoes of his voice still lived in every telephone call, in every sound that traveled across the wires he had helped create. Mabel lived for 5 more years, 5 years without the man she had loved since she was young. And though she could not hear the world the way others could, she could still feel it. She could feel the love he had left behind, the impact he had made, the mark he had left on history. When she passed away in 1923, at the age of 65, she joined him in rest, their voices forever intertwined in the whispers of time. And now, as you prepare to drift into peaceful sleep, remember that the Lord is always with you, guiding you through each day and night. May He watch over you, fill your heart with peace, and grant you rest that renews your body and soul. Good night, my friend. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May he make his face shine upon you and give you peace. Sleep well, and may you awaken refreshed with his love in your heart and his guidance in your thought.